Добрый день, друзья,
Good
коллеги.
morning, good afternoon, good day, dear colleagues, friends, and listeners. Today's topic is the book on the national language, in the national language, and bilingual books. And here we have Elena Minigaraeva, who is from Udmurtia, Zarina Kanukeva, who is a journalist, and Alexei Arzamasov, doctor of philology, PhD, professor. He is an expert in Finno-Ugric language. And I think my first question goes to Zarina Kanukova. What should be the national author today? What would be the good balance between the national language and the Russian language or any other bilingual publication? For me personally, when we talk about the national writers, national authors, there is no choice. You use your own language for writing, and this is good. You are blessed with the knowledge of your native tongue to the extent that you can write a literature piece, a literary piece. All the authors are equal in our country in the respect that we all speak the Russian language. But the ability to translate yourself into the Russian language is a strike of luck. It's also a very good quality and a very good ability, but knowledge of the two languages. In my case, this is Kabarda-Cherkess language, is really good. And I will not tell you why the priority should be on the side of the national language. There is no explanation on my side for this position. In the times when we all existed under the Soviet Union, we had translator schools. Now the situation with translations has changed for the worse. It is much more difficult now. But let us not discuss the difficulties. There is issue of personal involvement, emotional involvement, and it's quite substantial for all native speakers of my language. Emotional, in what respect? If you switch to Russian, by default, your readers and colleagues assume that you are a Russian language writer. But the space of Russian literature, modern Russian literature, doesn't accept you. And there are good grounds for this. So, emotions aside, you should simply get more practice if you want to be part of modern Russian literature. You have to work hard and do your best. Being loyal to your principles, you can enter the space of the Russian language. But why don't we discuss translation of national authors into the English language? I would like to make a statement. I would declare my plan and create a piece, and not maybe translated into the Russian language, but rather translated into English. I would like to present my work for the readers outside our country. We have quite a diaspora, Cherkess diaspora, in a lot of countries, including Jordan. And my work in the English language, translated into English, will be able to attract attention of Cherkess people living outside of Russia and pay attention to the contemporary Cherkess literature. This is especially important for the young readers. We are establishing the first children's theater that will use Cherkess language because the language of the theater stage is very effective. It will attract people, it will amuse people, and it will educate people because we're losing our language and we're looking for ways how to cope with this situation. Maybe it is worth making a comment here when we speak about the languages of Russia. We mean the low vitality of these languages and low level of preservation. So as Zarina said, if you as a national author attempt to write only in Russian without writing in your national tongue, then your national literary community is not considering you as a national writer. I think this is a very firm and very strange position. Not so many people can speak their native tongue, and when we discuss the languages of small, so-called small peoples or ethnic groups in the Far East or the North, we rather saying that there is a writer who is ethnically belongs to this ethnic group or nationality or people, but is not writing in the language of this nationality, ethnic group, or people. So a question to Alexei, who is an expert in Turkic and Finno-Ugric languages. What is the balance between the national languages and the Russian language in translations, in literature? Good morning. Thank you. It's very good that you mentioned the literature of the peoples of the Far North and the Far East. Of course, what is a national literature? To what extent the national literature has the national language as its basis? Because the literature of the peoples of the North is the literature now in the 21st century that is being created on the basis of the Russian language. So we have to find ways how to transfer the ethnic elements and cultural elements into the Russian language so that it will be accessible and available to the Russian readers. Of course, there are in the North, and there are people who write in Russian because they do not know their native tongue sufficiently enough to write in it. Meanwhile, they are trying to demonstrate their ability. There is a Yukagir poet, Nikolai Kugirov. He writes in Russian, and then he inserts a few words or a few lines in Yukagir language without a translation. And this is a way to express his internal inner him. He's fighting he's struggling for his national language. He's defending it, but he is not very well possessing the knowledge of the language. That's how he tries to demonstrate his support. in the research, in the scientific works on the linguistics of the past 30 years, is that for a national literature, the language is the marker. If you write in Avar or Tatar language, you correspond to the Avar or Tatar people. And examples of in modern national literatures show us that the landscape is much more picturesque. It's not even, it's not equalized. The criteria are changing, especially the criteria to identify national literatures. There are defining factors which are not, and the language here is not number one, but it is rather the feeling yourself as a part of national culture. Chingiz Aytmatov was writing in the Russian language, but he is perceived as a Kyrgyz writer, or Yuri Ridheu Chukotka writer. He was writing in the Russian language, though he's a representative of Chukotka literature. If we go to Turkic languages, the position is very uneven. Here in Tatarstan, there is a close correlation between the language and the national literature. Tatar people are quite numerous. They live all over Russia and all over the world. And of course, sometimes inside this ethnos, there is aggravation of tension between the conservative Tatar humanitarian elite, which resists the expansion of the Russian language in everyday life. And there is, on the other side, there is a progressive or liberal point of view, a part of intelligentsia, that views Guzel Yakhina as a representative of a big Tatar literature, though she writes in the Russian language. For Tatarstan, it is quite typical to be attached to the national language, to Tatar language. Meanwhile, there is some interesting realities that are connected to the certain internal blocking of the Russian language as the information and cultural intermediary. There are Tatar English projects being developed. There are dictionaries of Tatar language, ethnic and cultural language, being published in Tatar and English languages without the traditional Russian language. Russian language is missing in these dictionaries. It was an interesting project related to Finno-Ugric languages. It was initiated by Estonia some time ago. Young Makshans and Ezra poets were writing poetry in their national languages, and then later on they were translated into Estonian language, Swedish, Finnish, and the Russian language was missing in this poetic environment. That's a new form of multilingual approach. And I think it's a very interesting and promising approach. Our literatures and our languages should interfere with it themselves in a broader sense of this word. I think it's a proper way of development to look for the points of interest all over the world. Of course, we all speak Russian and speak it very well, but the national writer should not lower him or herself to the dependence from the Russian language. I think this would be a proper approach. I would like to emphasize that Alexei's words sounded in support of the ethnic languages. In his remarks, there was a motive that would probably please the radicals who support the cultural and ethnic in language and space and environment, because Alexei named these people as more progressive and liberal, that is, avoidance of using the Russian language. And if you are Yukagir by your identity, and unfortunately the people, there is a group of 30 people who represent this identity. As a poet who is inserting Yukagir words and lines in his poetry, but I think for the representatives of these communities, for literary circles, for people who are writing in the native language, would rather sound as escape from the native language, as a justification of a weak and untraceable official transition to the Russian language.
So it was like a way out of this situation. We don't want to see mixed texts. We don't want to see for 1,000 Russian words, only 2 Yukagir words. That's why we're speaking about the bilinguals as an opportunity not to forget or lose your own language, any national language, but to open the door to the text for those who don't know the language. So let's give the floor to Yelena. She knows the Republican language. It's one of the language that right now in the Russian Federation is still fighting for its own language community, for its space, for staying among the people. Elena, what could you add? Good morning, dear colleagues. My position, being the chief editor of the Republican newspaper, and the position of the writer, they are a bit different. These two positions. The chief editor of the Udmurt newspaper, it is issued only in the Udmurt language. So we have been going on for 6 years. It will be issued only in the Udmurt language. That's our position. This newspaper is read only for one reason, because it is in somebody's native language, in somebody's mother tongue. That's why in our newspaper we are not going to switch into other languages. Even I would like to say that the newspaper's ad that we have, it is translated into the Udmurt language, and people ask us to translate it into the Udmurt language. Let's imagine that just by chance there is one line in another language, for example in Russian, then our audience, our readers, they will be confused and they will ask us to see this newspaper 100% in Udmurt language. This newspaper isn't necessary. We also have social network, and sometimes some information about our projects is given in the Russian language. There are many people who want to know what we are active in, what spheres, and we also provide our readers with information about our projects. there was time during the festival, the literature festival, we discussed one issue when we use two languages, Udmurt and Russian, in the children magazines. So I believe that if it's the Udmurt children magazine, we should use only the Udmurt language in this type of magazine, because we have lots and lots of Russian children magazines, and there is only one and unique that is issued in the Udmurt language. So information in the Russian language is quite available to everybody, and you can get it quite easily. So the situation is not the same with the Udmurt language, but being the writer who writes and creates work in the Udmurt language, my position here is a bit different from my position as the chief editor. You should take into account the age of different people, and you shouldn't forget about children as well. For instance, children under 6, under 7 years old right now, many children forget their own language. And here I would like to draw your attention to books, bilingual books, some small texts. In the same book, you have texts in Udmurt and in Russian at the same time. This is I have a personal example. I have a son and a daughter. I taught them the Udmurt language. I read them books, and they could always compare two texts in two different languages and how they sound and how they look like. So when I communicate with the Udmurt publisher house that issues books in Russian, in Udmurt, and both in Russian and Udmurt, the head of the publisher house said that the most popular books are those which are issued in two languages, bilingual books. They are used in kindergartens, in schools, and I guess this is right. This is the right thing to do. If we talk about the adult category, the situation is a bit more complicated here. Let's say some person has difficulties with reading in the Udmurt language, so he would rather prefer books in Russian. And I think that adults should have two different books, one in Russian and one in Udmurt, a translation in Udmurt. This is very important to translate the national literature into English and into Russian, of course. And it broadens one's horizons, and it stimulates people, stimulates young and prominent writers to write in their native languages, in their mother tongue. I would also like to dwell upon online books. I believe that the mother tongue should sound, and these books should be in the Udmurt language. They should have a high quality, and their sound should be of a very high quality. And the translations should be at hand. Unfortunately, if we compare the school of translators, during the Soviet era, a lot of books were translated. Nowadays, it's not the same. And we have a big project right now when we have these big anthology volumes, a lot of Russian people's works, fairy tales, and legends are being translated into Russian. This is great. And everybody who wants to buy these books, they have this opportunity. Thank you, Elena. There are a few questions that we would like to pose. And now we are talking about the bilingual books. And we have this one situation about the Udmurt newspaper. So you want to keep the bilingual situation going on, and I believe that your principles are quite hard. But if we talk about the vertical hierarchy, did you have any orders? For example, did you have to publish all the materials in Russian as well? Did you get any pressure from above? For example, if we talk about the Hanti-Mansisk newspaper, they had this type of pressure. We talked with them and we didn't reach the same point. What was the standard? What percentage of books should be published in Russian as well? Should it be 100%, maybe less? So did you have some orders in the Udmurt newspaper? A few years ago, we had a case. There was some criticism, not against our text, but against the advertising content. We had the concert commercial, and we were criticized for not having the Russian translation, and there was a certain court practice. But that period is behind us. It's in the past. I don't want to go back to that. But there was this incident. We talked all these things over. Our newspaper is read, first of all, by people who believe that the Udmurt language is their first language. There are many publications in Russian in Udmurtia. The Udmurt administration is controlling the situation, but there are many other publishing houses. I don't think that we will have any problems in the future. It was just one single case. I believe that it was the only case throughout the history. Yes, we hope that you won't have such problems in the future that raise such discussions, and your colleagues won't face any problems of that kind. So what is the situation in the Caucasian region? Zarina, could you tell us about your native language and about the way the situation is in other regions of the Caucasian region? If you compare it to other regions and other subjects of the Russian Federation, there were certain debates what will be the main language for the communications. And right now we can see that there are more and more, let's say, state order emerging if you compare it to the Russian language in the same regions. Zarin, could you tell us how could you combine these two languages? If we talk about the North Caucasian region, we could remember the forum, the mass media forum. At this forum, there was a certain segment of national mass media. I didn't like the platform and the topic. So the topic was dedicated and had the same, the following title. Could the national newspapers live without any financial support? And the speaker was speaking and he was pondering over the following. He said that the national newspapers, national language newspapers, were doomed, and the main chief of the Russian newspaper, I started working in a newspaper that was published in the Kabarda-Circassian language. I worked in the literature newspaper in the publications department, and I consider myself in this journalist sphere, and I believe myself to be a bilingual expert, and I work in 2 languages. I didn't accept everything that was going on at that forum, and I'm still at odds with all the moderators and all the participants. This is one aspect, my personal aspect.
In the North Caucasus, I do not know what is the situation in the Republic of where Lena lives, or in Siberia, but in the North Caucasus, to be a language activist means to be on the brink, because you can be tagged, you can be named as a nationalist. The very fact that you exist in your own language, you write in your own language, you propagate your own language, this is enough sufficient ground for all your actions to be followed and traced, and you can be considered as part of the nationalist category. So for me, it is very important to observe this local mindset. It is not that easy for my colleagues also. I'm compassionate with them, and I look at Dagestan and Karacháyevo-Cherkessia, to a lesser extent Adygea. I do not know what is the solution here. I'm getting back to what Alexei discussed. The authors writing in the Russian languages, but being perceived as the national writers. Even if they are geniuses, these were the projects, to use the modern term. There was the projects of the state, of the government. The government supported the national languages, and these were just the cases, the showcases, and such authors could rely on support of the government. And at the same time, they could, the national authors could also rely on protection of the government. So these were selected people. They were taken from their small villages, sent to the Gorky Institute in Moscow. Then they returned back to their republic. And of course, there was no oppression. There was only support of these people. What I mean support, it is the status of the writer, that is good pay. But in the 1990s, it all disappeared. This was the time when my generation came into force, and we had about 20 people writing in the national language, and 18 of them left our community, only 2 remaining as writing in the national language. Our language, which is part of the Adiga Abkhaz family, cannot count on any support because we are very few. Um, we are spread all over the world, but we are too small as an ethnic group. Even Abkhaz have a wonderful opportunity for self-revival of their ethnic language. Why do they fail? If we take my favorite writer, Iskander, he's a genius. He is a genius writer. He's Abkhazian genius. But look how the Russian readers are fighting for him. They believe that he is a Russian writer. But I am rather looking at those who are writing in the native tongue, those who are persistent and insistent in their efforts to write in the national language. It is not very profitable. It is absolutely not beneficial if you do this, if you do write in your national language. You create your own status. You find some other job to support yourself. I'm a journalist, for instance. I write both in the Russian language and in my native language, national language. So you have to find an opportunity, look for a chance to write in your native tongue and support yourself at the same time. Thank you, Zarina. Abkhaz Adig group is developing within itself without external support. And Alexei, now I give the word to you. You've touched upon a lot of matters that are worth discussion in every detail. I have two directions in my development. I'm a researcher and I also write poetry. I believe I feel myself as an ethnic Udmurt. I started learning the language when I was 15 or 16, just a teenager. And the way to get into the language, I started writing poetry in Udmurt language. For me, it was my principal internal choice. It was my getting together with my people, with my language. I would not say that it was simple and straightforward, but I got into my language through poetry. It was very inspiring. You have to mobilize yourself. And as a writing author, it is evident for me that the national writers have to write in their national languages. And of course, you have to make an ethical choice. The reality of Tatarstan is very interesting in this respect, because quite often you can hear in Tatarstan that Tatarstan is probably one of the last regions in Russia that resists the language expansion of the Russian language and supports the cultural institutions and their functioning in the national Tatar language. A lot is being done to promote and support the Tatar language. But here I see a big problem, the problem of the language purity. For some ethnic group, it is the issue of ethnic assimilation in the Far East and the North, for example, where the situation is catastrophic. But where the demographic resources allow, like in Tatarstan, the issue of the purity of the language comes to the first place. I heard in the streets of Kazan, I heard the students of the philology department, and I heard them speaking Tatar to each other. It is 50-50. 50, it's a mixture of 50-50 Russian Tatar language. This is erosion from the inside. It destroys the quality of the language. We cannot discuss the purity of the language. You are losing the language purity, and the next will be the loss of the language, the ability to speak a pure national language. And this is the language loss, I would say. And I think the philology community should ask a question. What needs to be done to preserve the purity of the language, for the internal filtration to take place, to maintain this purity? And of course, the Tatar language and the Udmurt and Kabarda-Cherkess language are the languages with that can express a huge spectrum of all possible semantic meanings. Meanwhile, we are using cliches from the Russian language, and this is being discussed in the newspapers. Udmurt Dunya, it's a wonderful Udmurt newspaper, and it criticizes the journalists for writing in the Udmurt, Russified Udmurt language. The same is the situation in today's Tatarstan. The language is losing its roots. We, the people who live, exist, and operate in this situation are doomed to be bilingual, but it deforms our language behavior and our language patterns. It is a very, very important issue.
Thank
you, Alexei. As the participants of this process, and I'm not talking about today's discussion, but I'm talking about the process as a whole taking place in our country. People who work in literature, in the mass media, we have our ethnic identity, the feeling of belongingness to a certain ethnic group or people. We use the language in our family. Alexei, you tell us your story, how you came to Udmurt language when you were a teenager. I think we should all be very critical regarding the language policy. All this is done for us to be in this crisis situation for the language that are not the title languages of this country, not the Russian language. We should probably remain to be activists, and every representative of an ethnic community to view his or her role in the protection and preservation of the ethnic language. For the native speakers, before they give up their ethnic language, native tongue in favor of Russian, first they need to think what they should be in their personal history and the history of their people. Should they do all possible to protect the language, or just be members of an ethnic group surviving and using the Russian language. I think it's a very sensitive topic. It is close to all people who views him or herself as a citizen of a multi-ethnic, a multilingual country. But I think we should all work for this purpose in our professional